Hi, everyone. I think we will begin our session today, and welcome. My name is Jennifer Adams, and I'm the editor-in-chief with the Knowledge Hook Signature Leadership Series. Really happy to welcome to you to our SEL Global Leadership Series, and our topic for today is SEL, a new era in the US and beyond. We have three partners that have got together and have been hosting these webinars since last April, actually, as a result of the pandemic and some pretty crazy things that were happening around the world. And so we thought it was a good idea to put together a series that would really highlight how SEL can help as we move forward. Our first partner is Karanga, and Karanga is the Global Alliance for Social Emotional Learning and Life Skills. And the work that we're doing there, I'm an executive committee member, as well as Jojo, our host today. And it's really looking at trying to make sure that everyone around the world has a voice in sharing how SEL can help in their education systems and beyond. So that's our first partner. Our second partner is Salzburg Global Seminar, and they are an international nonprofit that came into being just after the Second World War. And they do an incredible job of helping to challenge current and future leaders. And there are fellows now from over 180 countries around the world. And our final partner is Knowledge Hook. And Knowledge Hook is a Canadian digital math company that has decided to step in and support thought leadership for senior education leaders, school leaders, and this is part of our series. You're welcome to go in, create an account. All of the resources are free, and we've got a great backlog of on-demand videos and podcasts that have all been recorded within the last year or so. So you're welcome to join in and access those resources. So back to the matter on hand, today we have with us registrants from 8 Canadian provinces, from 20 US states, and from 19 countries. And no surprise there when you look at who we have that's going to be speaking with us today. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you first our host, Joanne McEachen, who is lovingly known as JoJo to many of us. She is the Chief Executive Officer with the Learner First that was located out of Seattle, Washington for about 10 years. And JoJo has recently moved back to her homeland and is in Christchurch, New Zealand. So welcome to JoJo. And it's really my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond. And I'm sure most of you know and have heard Linda speak. I can tell you, Linda, that you were very influential in my early leadership years. Often heard you speaking at places like ASCD, and really enjoyed your policy work. Linda is a professor emeritus at Stanford University. She is the current president of the California State Board of Education. She's the past president of AERA and founding president of the Learning Policy Institute. She has such an amazing policy background, and she can really help us have this conversation on how do we make sure that social emotional learning is part of what we do in our schools, in our education systems, and outside of those education systems. So thrilled to have you both here, and I'm going to pass it over to Jojo to get this conversation started.
Kia ora koutou. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And Linda, I'm just so absolutely thrilled to bits to be able to be the person who's hosting you today. Growing up in New Zealand, we heard a lot about you, we knew a lot about you, and you are really championing the causes that are really close to the heart of many of the New Zealanders that I know, and a lot of people who are around the world, because you really believe in the whole child. And your work in SEL, your work in assessment, your work in the whole area of education that really is really about learning and teaching for everybody that's important. It's really, really impressive for the whole of the world. So we're really excited today to host you, and we can't wait to hear all of the stories that you have to share. I think for me, it's thinking about education is really knowing who you are, how you fit into the world, and how you can contribute back to humanity. And you've really understood that whole concept when you're talking about social and emotional learning as a foundation for education. And the work that you've been doing in California and across the whole of the States, it's just really interesting to see how much you've been able to align policy to practice and really making sure that it works. So today, as we're sort of living in these unprecedented times of challenge of COVID, of what's going on across the world, the challenges that we're facing, it's fascinating to watch, to see how that you're really taking these really bold steps and not even realizing that we may not know the answers yet, but you're making decisions to make sure that every single child and parent and teacher has access to what they need and the tools for the future. You've got some amazing questions that we want to talk through today. You've got a really exciting presentation for us. And to the people who are listening, we encourage you to ask questions. We're going to have a chance to have a chat with Linda at the end of this. So when she's finished her presentation, answering some of these questions on our screen, we'd really love you to have that chance to interact with her. So feel free to take notes, ask questions, use the chat room, talk to each other. This is an opportunity for us to really understand what Linda's been experiencing as she's been going through all of these times together. So feel free to jump in, and before we do that, I invite Linda to take us through her learning over the past years, what she's been doing as she's been thinking about SEL in policy. She's been working with Joe Biden's administration team. She's also been thinking about what advice she's got for schools and districts, for education leaders who are really looking at supporting SEL in the classrooms. So welcome, Linda. It's a real pleasure to be talking with you today, and I invite you to begin your presentation. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to be here. And I am going to try to share my screen and see if I can just do some framing about SEL before we get into all of the policy weeds. So, I think all across the world, as we're recovering from this pandemic, we are thinking about the road to recovery, about how to return not to the old normal, but to a new normal that allows us to build back better in our schools and in our societies. The moments like the one we are now experiencing in this global pandemic with the associated economic crises and climate crises and other challenges to us as humankind often do lead to generational social changes. And I think this is a moment where people are able to think about each other and the way we support each other and the way we support our children in some new ways. In the United States, we've been hard hit, as you undoubtedly know. And in California, most of our schools are still closed to in-person learning, but we're just beginning to come back. Learning Policy Institute did a document called Reinventing and Restarting Schools that really makes this point that an Atlanta parent made to us. Reprioritize, she said. This is the time to see if something can be different. To reset the system, we have to take a loss, but we can recoup the loss if we actually get kids excited about education and create a more positive space for them to learn. And I think that that's something that is on the minds of people all over the world. We, in that work on restarting and reinventing, suggest that reinventing school means focusing on authentic learning that really connects to the world, beyond the classroom, and equity, and harnessing the knowledge of human development, learning, and effective teaching accumulated over the last century and needed for the next. And the science of learning and development is being understood and synthesized in many ways. And so I've been part of a group of folks who have been trying to synthesize what we know from neuroscience, from learning science, cognitive science, developmental science together. And in the Applied Developmental Science Journal, there are a set of papers that really try to do that. The one that my team was responsible for, Implications for Practice of the Science of Learning and Development, is shown here. It's been downloaded more than 500,000 times, which is unusual for a journal article and suggests something about the appetite we have for figuring out how to really build schools on what we know about how people learn. And so I'm going to start by doing a little bit of illustration of the science in action. And true confessions, this is my grandson when he was about 3 weeks old.
Oh, really? What else? Oh, so then what did you do? And then what happened?
So what do you see here? You see the ways in which we know that experiences and relationships especially activate neural pathways. This is a tiny baby learning really a first experience at conversation. And he engages in this conversation because of the relationship with his mother and the interaction that they are having, and how important that is to activate the neural pathways that actually allow the development of various kinds of skills. Learning is social, and you can see that here, that there's no way this kind of learning would be going on without that social connection. Emotion and learning are completely linked. And it's because this little guy loves his mother, that you heard my daughter, who is a teacher, you could probably tell, that he tries so hard to figure out what he's supposed to be doing to communicate with her. Authentic tasks motivate effort, and feedback shapes learning. In fact, there's a recent study from Harvard that found that it is not the amount of language that children hear that develops their linguistic repertoire. It is the number of turns of conversation in which they interact with others and get feedback as they are learning and talking that actually develops their language capacity. And that language, of course, generates thinking as well as representing it. We know that from Vygotsky on forward. And so the principles from the science of learning and development that we need to build schools around as we reinvent them for this century are that relationships are the essential ingredient that catalyzes healthy development and learning, that children actively construct knowledge by connecting what they know to what they are learning, and they do that, of course, within their personal and cultural contexts. And so we need to be able to bring that cultural and personal connection to the process of, as Dewey said, bringing the child to the curriculum and bringing the curriculum to the child. Learning is social, emotional, and academic. We learn much more effectively if we feel positively about our environment, if we have a sense of trust, if we feel like we are safe in that environment, that we are cared for, and that we are interested and inspired by what's going on. And we learn much less if we are traumatized, if we are stigmatized, if we do not feel safe in the environment. That is also true that students' perceptions of their own ability influence learning. And we did inherit in many parts of the world systems where kids were categorized early on by perceived ability and tracked into different streams or lanes of academic progress that actually depress learning for those who get the perception that they are not viewed as capable in their learning process. Two children who start at the same point at a moment in time, if one is sort of tracked into a more rigorous curriculum in which more is expected of them versus tracked down, will achieve at different levels later as a result of that experience, not as a result of their initial ability. And then we know that adversity affects learning, and this is so important today because so many children across the world have experienced trauma of various kinds during the pandemic. And we know that effective schools must be trauma informed and understand what children may bring into the setting, and they must be healing focused at the same time. When we think about the neuroscience, the expression of cortisol when we are anxious, stressed, scared, feel threatened, impedes our learning, and there are many kids who have that experience during the school day. If the framework for schooling is not intentionally supportive, the countervailing set of both hormones and physical reactions that open up the possibilities of greater learning include the oxytocin that's released when we hug each other. Someday we'll be back to doing that regularly. And when we are able, virtually and otherwise, to give each other care and give each other a sense of mutual concern. And we need school settings that are explicitly developing the opportunity for oxytocin to affect the brain architecture that develops into intelligences of various kinds and not the cortisol. That means having a sense of belonging in the school in which students are academically and socially respected and accepted in every different part of their experience and a sense of relatedness with other students. I want to take just a minute to sort of share with you this Edutopia video about building a belonging classroom, and we'll just take about 2 minutes.
Anything else special happened this weekend, friends?
In the pool, I did a cannonball. I know how to swim.
You know how to swim?
I know how to blow bubbles underwater.
You
Me
do?
too.
As human beings, one of the most essential needs we have is the need to belong. In school, children need a sense of belonging to be able to be productive learners. They need to be connected to their fellow students, connected to their teachers, to also be affirmed in who they are in a way that is positive and accepting.
I don't take swimming lessons.
In a belonging classroom, there's a community being explicitly built. The teacher knows each child and things about each of those children that they can mention and draw on.
I pay attention, I listen. I'm really invested in what they tell me. The students feeling loved, students feeling nurtured, students feeling like they have a place at school, they're safe. It activates their brain cells. What side would you go?
Sense of belonging is one of the most important activators of a child's engagement in learning. Everything about activating a child's cognitive skills begins with activating their social connectedness. The energy for learning is coming from the social connection that children have.
But in the end, we're trying to come up with an agreement.
Excellent. We're not going to comment, question. We're only going to encourage. Because they're culturally and linguistically diverse students, I want to really make sure that we are making them feel connections. All the writing we do in our class, it's very much about them. It helps and promotes them to find their own voice and to share their stories.
Sometimes people think every Muslim person is a target or is a terrorist.
Thank you, Anissa.
Answering our second question. What did this show us about what we are good at as a group?
Working together, because we often argue a lot.
Today we did an activity that was really designed to get them thinking about how they're going to support each other. I think that reiterating the idea that we're in this together, I think it's hard to find the time, but doing some team building exercises at the beginning of the year and revisiting them can really help illustrate that point.
So I'm going to move us along and get the point.
In a belonging classroom, they have a community that may meet in classroom meetings to problem solve together, to read stories together, to tell successes and accomplishments or important events together. They celebrate like families do, things that each other have done or have experienced.
Let's talk about what we admire.
And there's so much that we see in that context about the ways in which belonging really provides part of the pathway to learning. And I think this is a key point, that social emotional learning is not something that stands on the side and that we have to make room for at the expense of academics, but in fact, it is the pathway to academic achievement and success. We know as well that the development of neural networks is enhanced by everything from rich environments and green space and physical activity on the one hand, to the involvement in mental activity, mindfulness that allows us to center ourselves and to clear our brains, social interaction, and emotional and cultural well-being, which we were seeing examples of in that video. And it's impaired by stress, anxiety, loneliness, sleep disruption, dietary deficiencies, toxins, and identity threats. And it's important to recognize that in most societies, there are some children who are getting a lot more of the enhancements, and there are others who are getting a lot more of the stressors. And we have to think about what schools need to be to offset and create the relationships that can be antidotes to that toxic stress. One form of that is social identity and stereotype threat, which is vividly present certainly in the United States and also in many other societies. Any identity that we hold that is stigmatized in society, whether that is race, ethnicity, immigration status, language background, whether it's age, disability, sexual orientation, can really be either offset by a school environment that explicitly creates affirmation for children, or can be reinforced in school, thereby creating that physical toxic stress condition that people feel when they have experienced social identity and stereotype threat. That cortisol and adrenaline that is triggered can create a fight or flight reaction. It impedes learning. It also means that students may be very vigilant, hyper vigilant to those threats and be sort of on a hair trigger if something happens. But we know from a lot of research that can be reduced by affirming the value of every student, making a clear commitment to equal access to high quality curriculum and teaching and programs, and cultural competence and strong relationships in all aspects of the school. And school-wide social emotional learning, where everyone is learning how to be in relationship to each other interpersonally, how to be reflective about their feelings, and how to manage those in productive ways. So the foundation for social emotional learning is the positive school climate with that safety and those strong relationships that are created by the way we structure schools. That means getting beyond the warehouse factory models that many societies inherited in the early 1900s, where kids are passed off from one teacher to another, and where they may not have a strong family group, often the case in many high schools especially. Social emotional learning that's explicit about teaching those skills. And then, of course, academic learning comes from that. We know that the meta-analyses about social and emotional learning have found that when schools have programs that address social emotional learning explicitly, that they are safer, there's less student and teacher stress, less bullying, higher achievement significantly, and higher graduation rates. And those gains persist over time. And those skills include not only the ones that the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning lays out in this very well-known wheel: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. They also include executive functioning, helping students learn to plan and organize and follow through and problem solve, which is actually supported by project-based learning and inquiry-based learning that puts students in a position to learn those skills if they are well supported by their teachers. It includes perseverance and resilience, growth mindset, and mindsets of belonging, purpose, and the value of schools. And so the conditions for this development include not only regular opportunities to learn and integrate those skills throughout the day very explicitly. Don't assume them, but we know we have to teach them. The guidance to develop those skills, habits, and mindsets, but also educative and restorative behavior supports that foster belonging rather than exclusion, that rather than sending students out of school by suspension or expulsion if there's a challenge, in fact, pull them in by having processes of community development, of reflection, of making amends, of restoring the community. We know that these supports for attachment and relationships can include the ways we structure schools. And there's a lot of evidence that small schools and small learning communities with continuous relationships that are provided by looping or advisory systems, block scheduling, longer grade spans for schools, all contribute to achievement because they contribute to belonging, to relationship building. Classroom practices that support competent, culturally competent and affirming experiences for all children. And then, of course, the trust and collaboration with families, which requires us to find time, put money into the time for teachers to do the home visits, the outreach to parents, the positive calls home that establish those relationships. So these are policy issues that have to be addressed in order for the work that teachers do in schools to be more effective. We have tools for teaching social emotional learning and things like advisories where a small group of students stays with a teacher for multiple years of middle and or high school. This comes from one of my favorite tools, the advisory guide, which has a lot of different activities. This one asks kids to reflect on their own strengths, the best thing I bring to a group, a personal strength or skill that I bring to working out problems, a contribution I've made to my advisory during the last month. There's a whole variety of ways, of course, that we can help students think about how to be pro-social, activate their strengths and their skills, identify them and develop them so that we're in an asset-based environment. Rich learning experiences need to accompany this. And we know, of course, that these kind of experiences build on students' prior knowledge and cultural experience. So it's important for teachers to have what I call a two-way pedagogy, knowing a lot about their students so that they can build on it. Offering inquiry-based tasks that are a pathway into exciting work, replacing competition and comparison with collaboration, supporting growth through feedback, reflection, and revision, where tasks provide an authentic opportunity to demonstrate knowledge connected to the real world, a problem in the real world, and where feedback from peers, from rubrics that one oneself may look at, from the instructor, give us always the opportunity to revise. And what you see in those contexts is that the achievement gap reduces significantly because those who have been less experienced in an area have the opportunity to learn in the way we all as human beings learn best, which is through feedback and the opportunity to try again, practice, and to try again. And then to think about what we're doing and learn those cognitive strategies that guide our future learning. All of this is really part of social and emotional learning. There are ways that this learning can happen well in heterogeneous groups rather than through tracking systems that allocate students to different levels of both status and curriculum. And there are wraparound systems of academic and social support that are very much needed, that provide academic supports when they're needed, as well as social and emotional supports, which may take the form of counseling in groups or individually. It may take the form of figuring out what's going on with families and supporting students whose families may be housing insecure, food insecure, healthcare insecure. These are especially problems in the United States, but they're not located only in our country, and this is a huge policy agenda. How do we get the wraparound supports, the community school settings in which there are people organized to bring resources to students and make sure that they are readily available when they're needed. And at the end of the day, having a framework that really thinks about the whole child in all of the social, emotional, and academic contexts in which they live, does what John Dewey urged us to think about a century ago. I find that Dewey plagiarized almost everything I thought before I thought it, and this is one of my favorites. What the best and wisest parent wants for his or her child, that must the community want for all of its children. Any other goal is narrow and unlovely, and acted upon, it destroys our democracy. Only by being true to the full growth of all the individuals who make it up can society, by any chance, be true to itself. And I know that that is the agenda that all of you are working on, and I'm delighted to be here to work on this with you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can have a conversation.
Wow, thank you so much, Linda. That was absolutely impressive. I think what you've done is you've woven all of the questions that we've been talking about into your story today, and you've given us a really deep understanding of the work that you've been doing over multiple years. What you've been talking about is that SEL is the foundation for all we do, and it talks about the humanity of the work we're doing. And you're talking about we're raising humans in our education system, and I think you've made that so clear for us. So thank you so much for that. I think I just want to encourage anybody who wants to have a question or ask a question of Linda to feel free to put that into the question box. But I want to just refer back to some of the questions that we posted to talk about today, and just ask you, you know, we know it's really important to have social emotional learning as part of our policies and processes. Why do you think, Linda, that it's still a struggle for some systems to actually accept this and actually have this as part of their work and learning? Is it because of the fear of the academic loss? What do you think that's really about? And how can we help our system leaders to really understand the importance of this?
Well, it's a funny thing. So many societies have adopted sort of a competitive framework for thinking about individuals within the society, along some kind of economic or social pecking order. And then we've had international competition. We look at the PISA results when they come out. We say, who's on first, and there's a part of that which can be productive because we can learn from each other and explore what different countries are doing, or within our countries what different states or districts or schools are doing. But there's also part of it that if we don't think about the humanity that has to be our framework, can be destructive because it causes people to focus in and narrow their vision. And I think that a lot of folks, a lot of leaders have thought that to be an academic or economic competitor, that you have to focus in on things like, the test scores or the other metrics that have become very popular. And I'm not opposed to the metrics, and I certainly engage in a lot of the cross-national conversations about how we should think about supporting uh, better schooling that sometimes is reflected in those metrics. But what people have not always understood is that social emotional learning, which a lot of uh, policymakers may have thought of as sort of fluff on the side, like it gets in the way, it's mushy, it takes time away from learning math, it takes time away from learning other subject areas, is actually the pathway to being more successful. That in fact, the biggest predictors of our success as human beings, as adults, is our set of social and emotional competencies that allow us to do everything from focus and manage our lives, to getting along with each other, to using each other's ideas in creative ways that allow us to invent and contribute to society and to each other. And that you can't just have a brain in a box, and somehow turn that into productive human activity that we all depend on. And I think one of the things that's so important in this moment, we've seen it in the pandemic, that collaboration across countries, the advances that have been made on vaccines for COVID-19 have been internationally researched. The degree of interaction among countries to figure this out, it's only through those social and emotional skills of collaboration and recognizing our common humanity and sharing our knowledge and ideas and our innovations in education as well, that we're actually able to make progress as humans. And in this era, with climate change and a variety of other threats to human existence, we have got to learn to value our capacity to work together and to develop it.
And I think, Linda, what you're saying is we're moving from me to we. We have to do this together, and that's about understanding who we all are and being able to each contribute our own set of skills to be able to make this work. And the priority is to really understand that and to move away from that sort of that there's only one way of doing things. So I think you're making that really clear. One of the really big questions that I know everybody's on everybody's mind is that you've had the opportunity to be working on President Joe Biden's leading the education team for the changeover. Are you willing to share a little bit about how that's been going and whether or not that SEL has been a big part of that policy decision-making process, or how is that going for you? And can you share what that's doing for, at the moment?
Well, I will start by just sharing that very on a personal level. Joe Biden and his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, are very connected to people. They're very humanistic. They care about education. They care about children, and they care about the social and emotional side of the human experience. I was privileged to be able to brief them early on before the transition on what was happening with COVID and how we might reopen schools. And the very first question that President-elect Biden asked was, how are the kids doing? What do we need to do to support their wellness, their mental health, their social and emotional well-being? Really, the very, very first concern. We just this week are in our legislature passing a gigantic American Rescue Act, which is a COVID recovery bill, and there is significant resources in that context for wraparound supports, health and mental health supports, community schools that provide the wraparound services, and other things like that. There's a leaf blower going by my window. I think I'm going to move to another place and try.
This is called the reality of live presentations, isn't it?
Yes.
It's fantastic, yeah.
I'm going to you can keep talking and I'll just walk you through my house till I get to a place where I can.
Yeah.
So Linda and Jojo, maybe in the meantime, there are amazing questions that are coming up in the chat box, and I'm going to relay a few of them over to you as you get settled into your new spot, Linda. And actually, this is great because we feel like we know you better now that we're walking through your home with you.
I might have to get up again. I had my anniversary this week, so those are the flowers my husband got me. Aren't they lovely?
Lovely backdrop. Well, now it's perfectly. We can see them in the background, and it shares love in the whole group. That's a great thing. We have a question from Scott, and Scott is talking about how do we get students, teachers, and parents to place a higher value on learning over grades. And there were a number of comments about this real focus on large-scale assessment and standardized assessment and grading and report cards. And so let's start off with that, Linda and Jojo.
Well, I think that one of the things that we have to do is think about how we help college admissions evolve, as we're also thinking about what might happen in elementary and secondary schools, because all these systems are connected to each other. And so if there's, competitive admissions to college, then, and those require certain metrics, then those are certainly going to continue to be important in the minds of others. So I think that, there's a couple of things. One is, some schools have done really interesting work around grading or providing feedback in ways that are tied to the acquisition of certain skills, rubrics that give you information about how kids are progressing or how different pieces of work reflect the dimensions of competence. These are not intended to be competitive. For one thing, I think we have to get rid of the idea of, comparison, competitive grading schemes, the sort of the norm referencing that assumes that there's only, one dimension on which we could rate people. They have to be rated against each other. What we want to do is understand the skills and the abilities that we're trying to help students develop, and then help them see how they're developing against those skills and abilities. And so that's one piece of it, is shifting the framework to a criterion reference framework, and then also providing narrative response to work and to the feedback process that says, here's where you've succeeded, here's the next steps for you, thinking about zonal proximal development, what's the next thing that each of us needs to do, and then recognizing, the multiple ways in which people develop skills and intelligences and abilities and so on, and how important it is to have a diversity of those as well. So I think part of it is the way we give feedback. I started a school with some colleagues which only gave narrative feedback along a rubric. The rubric was designed to reinforce certain ways of thinking and being. So on every assignment and in every class, the grading was on personal responsibility, social responsibility, critical and creative thinking, communication, and application of knowledge. And then application of knowledge, would be further elaborated within the content area that was being evaluated. But what happened as a result of that is that the social and emotional skills of personal responsibility and social responsibility were always on the table. Kids were always thinking about how do we develop those. And when they did their graduation portfolios, they could say, look at where I used to be when I was a ninth grader. And now I'm able to contribute to my community in all of these ways. These are the things that I do for my fellow students. These are the things that I've learned to do to be a good member of the community. And ways in which I've developed my capacity to organize myself and be responsible. And then those tools can get translated on to families and to other kids. So just to think about it in terms of what are we really trying to accomplish here, and get rid of a lot of the baggage that we inherited from the eugenics movement in the United States in the early 1900s that was all about norm referencing and which groups of people are better than which other groups of people, not only individuals. And then that kind of bled into, all kinds of rating, ranking, and sorting systems. It's going to be up to educators to say, we're going to redefine schools to be something other than ranking and sorting systems.
I get excited when I'm talking to you. So it's like so we have like a lot of educators, they really understand this now, and they've got that clear understanding of how to do this. But society at large, because most parents have been through school, they've understood that's how school works. There's sometimes when I'm working with systems, they struggle with that because that's what they know and that's what they understand. How do we help wider society recognize the importance of social and emotional learning, not just the educators themselves?
Yeah. Well, obviously, part of this is having really strong relationships with families in your own school, so that they're understanding what you're doing and so on. In the same school that I mentioned earlier, we're in a community. The school is in a community that is low-income community, mostly new immigrant families, and we were told when we started the school that, you will never get the families to show up, for back to school or something. But we ended up with 100% parent participation because we asked teachers and found time and funded the time for them to do positive phone calls home, to do home visits or visits at a place of the family's choosing. It may not be a parent, it might be a grandparent, it might be a guardian. There's a lot of different, family arrangements. And then the advisory system where each advisor had 15, 16, 17 kids and was in charge of the relationship with the home. And then as we develop those relationships, you can then say, here's what we're trying to do. Student, parent, teacher conferences 2 or 3 times a year, where the parents actually see the portfolio of the students' work. They see what the students work on. They see the rubric with responsibility and what does that consist of, and social responsibility, what does that consist of, critical and creative thinking. And then, you get a lot of buy-in because everybody's part of the process.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things that I think you're saying is that part of our job too as educators is to help educate the society as well too now. And I think that's something that we probably not everybody has been doing, because we've been thinking about teaching kids. So part of it is for us to really make sure that we are engaging our parents and families to really understand this is a really big shift we have to make. And to do that, we have to really be talking to everybody all of the time about why and how.
And we have to document the successes of schools that take up these issues in new ways, because otherwise people will assume that it's not going to be successful.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Jojo and Linda, Trevor made a comment and said, it's not just parents, but it's also state, provincial, national governments that need to be convinced that actually kids that are in an environment where well-being and learning together are looked at, they're actually producing better results. And, you know, that comes back to the comment that you just made, Linda, but also some of the policy work that you're doing in California and around, where you're really showing that there's evidence to say that kids and staff are better, well-rounded people coming out of learning environments like that.
Right. And I mentioned the meta-analyses, and, you know, happy to share these slides. And by the way, the work I was talking about in that school is in a book called Be the Change, if anybody wants to sort of look at the ways in which those measurements of social emotional learning and so on were done. But I think it's important to ground it in research. You know, those meta-analyses show very closely with hundreds of studies that attending to social emotional learning produces stronger academic achievement. And you need to have the you know, sort of research foundation to be a good advocate for the practices, as well as the examples of, you know, how to do it and how to educate others for it. The other piece is that in the United States, at least, a lot of states have been adopting social and emotional learning standards right alongside academic standards as something that are used for schools where, you know, we have some challenging and you know, many would say we're coming out of a very counterproductive accountability movement, but part of what states are asked to do is provide data about schools, and many are putting positive climate indicators into those systems, putting, you know, other evidences of social and emotional as well as academic learning. And I think that's important to say we care about these. In California, we've just enacted a SEL of civic engagement, which is a way that we're going to be recognizing for graduating students how their engagement in supporting, you know, good work in the community is recognized along with their academic.
We've had a question from somebody asking, can you please say the name of the school that you are talking about as well?
Yeah, with others, I was involved in starting a school called East Palo Alto Academy in East Palo Alto, California. It's across the bridge from Palo Alto, tale of two cities, as is often the case in the United States. It had been completely segregated for a long time. It was an African American community that is now majority Latinx immigrants. And the book is called Be the Change, if people want to see the way in which we built a successful environment. It was a place where 2/3 of the kids were dropping out before they got to graduation, and now 90% are graduating and 90% going to college every year.
That's great. It's wonderful to have a really good concrete example, and if anyone else has got some examples, they might want to pop them into the chat room too. One of the questions that I'm interested in, Linda, is that people often say they don't have time to switch into doing this kind of work, or that it's an add-on, those kinds of things. We absolutely know that's not. Can you sort of talk about how much more money or how much more budget does it take to do this kind of work? Or is it just that it's a reshaping of how you're spending your money? Have you seen that it costs more money to teach in this way, or to have SEL as the base? Is there a difference in budgeting? People often say, it costs more money to teach like this and you have to give teachers more time. Is that true or not?
You can rethink the way you structure the resources in your school, to be sure. You know, we often have schools that have, particularly at the middle and high school level, that crowd them up with all kinds of courses that, you know, there's a sense that kids have to take a lot of different electives and so on, and those are very costly. So the programs that we have, you may have to think about, how are we using our time? How are we using our resources? Which things, you know, are most important? But a lot of this work gets infused right into what you're doing anyway. And so I do think it can, if you're in a setting where there are not opportunities for small groups of teachers and kids to be together, you may have to add money for that. So that there is a place, particularly in secondary schools, where kids have a family group that supports their learning in every imaginable way and gives a whole child space to them. But a lot of places have the resources to do that. And it's just restructuring the way in which adults and kids are put together. so that they have, the spaces to do this work. And then a lot of it is infused right into the way you teach. So when you think about growth mindset, which we know is so important, if you teach in a way that gives kids careful scaffolding, that uses universal designs for learning and gives a lot of pathways in, that provides opportunities to do things and revise your work continually so that you can always demonstrate to yourself and others that you can get better, and that grades on the final learning, not on all the averages of what you've done along the way. You can do that with an existing in English language arts class or whatever class it is, by the way in which you structure the. So I think that particularly in societies that have universal health care and have other supports for children, we have a tattered safety net in the United States. So it does take a lot of money in a school like East Palo Alto, where kids don't have health care, don't have, food security, maybe getting evicted from their homes, to provide those things, you have
That's
to
right.
find a way. But in a society that's taking care of children, this is really just about rethinking the way you use the existing resources.
And that sort of leads me into the equity question, where when you are really addressing the social and emotional needs of students, you are actually looking at equity through the lens of the child. So you're actually making sure they get what they need. So that actually does address equity. So when you do this, you are genuinely looking at who is a child and what do they need. So that you're not having to sort of think about equity as an add-on, or equity, are we doing everything in this sort of way? So for me, when I think about that, we're actually saying, who is this child? What do they need? So we're not having to chase around and try and find a policy or a system to figure that out. Is that your experience? Is that what you would say as well? Is that kind of?
You need a school environment that has been designed to be focused enough on that for all the adults and flexible enough to access those resources that kids may need, or to access that human relationship that they need, right? Which is usually what we need to access. That they can get what they need when they need it. So it is really about the frame of mind, and then we have to translate that into the structures for schools.
And then I suppose it's really sort of thinking about making sure that each student gets what they need through the right representation of their culture, through the right representation of the context for learning, and and that can only be done in a safe and trusting environment. And so therefore equity is such a big piece of this. So therefore social and emotional learning is such a big piece of what happens, that what is right and just right now to create a just and equitable society.
And it's all about having every child feel that they belong, that they have membership, that they are at the center of, someone's attention, the teacher and others, that they're affirmed in their value. And you saw that, being enacted in the little video clip.
That's right.
In so many beautiful ways that teachers invent to make sure that children experience that attachment, which is then the basis on which they do all the rest of it.
And it's really interesting, Linda, because some of the work that I do now, I actually write learning progressions for adults too, in the same space of self-understanding and connection and competency, because I think there's we as adults, we need to relearn this kind of work as well, because we haven't had time to remember who we are as well. So I think self-understanding and social and emotional learning for us as adults too in this profession is really important as well. Do you do a lot of work with sort of adults to help them to remember that their needs are important too?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's whatever adults experience is what is likely to get passed on to children too. So you can't ask adults to do something that they themselves are not experiencing. And that goes for every aspect of the school, from the way in which, for example, teachers might be evaluated, to the way in which they are supported, enabled, provided with opportunities both to learn and to practice wellness practices. And so I think it's all tied up together.
I think it's critical, isn't it? Because if they're not well, kids aren't going to be well either. Okay, we're about 2 minutes away from the end of our session with you, Linda. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that you would like to share with us just as we wind up? I think you've got such an amazing set of knowledge. You've done such an incredible amount of work for education. I can't thank you enough. You've been one of my heroes my whole education life. So it's just, I feel so honored to have been able to have a chance to sit here and talk with you just like this and chat with you and have answer and talk questions with you as well. So is there anything you'd like to share with us?
Well, first of all, it's terrific to be with you. I've been watching a little bit in the chat, and I see we have people from all over the world, and I love the opportunities that we can all have to share with each other. Great things are happening everywhere. Educators are innovating and developing these new systems everywhere. I think it's just really important that we stay connected and share, what we are developing, because that's how we move the world forward.
That's right, yeah, and it's people like you who are helping us to do that. So it's with great gratitude that we say thank you very much to you, Linda, and it's great gratitude that we say thank you to all of the people who are being a part of this session today, and we wish you a wonderful day, and we thank you for being a part of the SEL community, and thank you Knowledge Hook, thank you Karanga, and thank you Salzburg Global for being being our partners for today, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, Jojo. We're just going to end with a couple of slides here. Linda, you gave us a perfect opportunity to say, yeah, this is all about sharing. And we really appreciate, as Jojo said, that you were willing to come and share. And just wanted to give people an opportunity. This link here allows you to go in and create all the resources that are in this portal are all free and always will be. It's our opportunity to be able to share past videos or past roundtables as well. There's podcasts, etc. So they're on these 3 topics, and the 4th topic is SEL, and they're available to anyone that wants to sign up. And finally, just to end things off, we have an upcoming roundtable that is taking place on Thursday, March the 25th, and we're going to take a look at Australia. And we have Pasi Selberg, who is originally from Finland, but is working at the in New South Wales, in Sydney, Australia, and Pauline Taylor-Guy, who is with the Australian Council for Educational Research. I'm going to talk a little bit about improving schools and school leadership. So hope to be able to see all of you there. Thanks very much to everybody. Linda, it's been a pleasure, and we hope to see you again here.